Hello and welcome back to Round the Table, your slow TV English class from the Meeting Point, broadcasting not only to Bilbao but throughout the world. And in today's programme we'll be looking at a little pronunciation problem for you, which will be followed by a public information announcement. Then we have some quite interesting facts, quite a lot of quite interesting facts on the theme of communication. And we've got a little game for you. And of course we have our celebrity guest speaker talking about the importance of communication. And we might finish with a little joke that somebody sent me. But first, some pronunciation problems. Here's a very small pronunciation problem for this week. When you've got a word that ends with an S and another consonant, and then we put another S on the end to make the plural or the third person singular of the verb, you might get a word like tests. Test with an S on the end, you get the word tests. Or posts. So you got the STS sound, posts, which is a very difficult little cluster to say. There's also one in texts, and that one has a k, s, t, s in it, texts. That's a very difficult word to say. You can also do them with SPS in words like crisps, clasps, crisps and clasps, or SKS in risks, masks. So you get this sound where you have S's either side of a T, a P or a K. These are all called voiceless stops. They're the only ones that can have the S either side of them. Sometimes you might get something that ends in a SMS. If you make a plural of organism, those ism words that everybody hates, you can get organisms. But because a is a voiced sound, the two S's sound more like a Z, like a Z. Organisms. Most of the ism words are cultural things in society. So you talk about communism, consumerism, those kind of things. So they very rarely come with an S on the end. But occasionally you get a word like organisms, where it does go SMS on the end. So those are very difficult consonant clusters.
This is a public information announcement. Take crossing seriously. When using a zebra crossing, it is important that you take the business of crossing a road seriously. Approach the crossing and press the little button. Do not cross if the red man is showing. Wait for the green man. This woman is not waiting and is putting her life and the lives of others in serious danger. When the green man shows, walk in a sensible straight line across the street. There is no need to put your arms out as if you are flying. And do not look to see if you are being filmed. Do not dance across the street. This woman is behaving in a very irresponsible manner. As is this woman. Walk in a sensible way, like this and this. Take crossing seriously.
And this week we have a lot of quite interesting facts. none of which are amazing, but I think you'll have to agree they are quite interesting. The topic of the week, of course, was communication, which covered a vast array of different ideas, really. One of the things we were talking about was the advent of printing and how that would have reduced the price of books and made them more available to the public. And we were speculating as to what the price of a book would have been when it was written by hand on these ancient manuscripts that were written by monks in monasteries, and how long it would have taken, because surely if you were copying the Bible it would be a lifetime's work, I would imagine. You could only write half a page per day, I suppose. So the question that people were asking was, what would a Bible cost in those days? Well, I'd done a bit of research. I asked my computer, and apparently it would cost upwards of 200,000 euros in modern money. And that would be quite a cheap Bible. 200,000 to 400,000. And of course, some of the better ones would go for over $1 million in modern money. We were discussing the Book of Kells, which is a religious book which is actually in the university in Dublin, in Trinity College, I believe. I was looking into that. It was made in about 800 AD on the island of Iona, and it was moved to Kells to escape from Vikings, because in those days the Vikings were a big problem, stealing people's religious books and things. Well, apparently this is not a complete Bible. It's only the 4 Gospels in Latin, but it says here, immensely expensive in time, labour and materials, and it's probably worth more than most people would have earned in a lifetime. So it was an incredibly expensive thing, and it wasn't made for any one particular person, apparently. It was just a religious text, so it would have gone on display in a church or something. And it's written on high quality calf skin parchment. Calf skin, so the skins of young cows, that's calf skin. And they would have had to kill 185 young cows to make the parchment for it to be written on. Many rare colours were used in the illustrations. Lapis lazuli, that came all the way from Afghanistan. So it was very expensive to colour it. Interestingly, there is no gold leaf in a lot of these religious texts. They use gold leaf, but this one apparently not. And it seems that dozens of scribes and artists would have worked on it for many years, possibly decades. So that's an interesting thing about the price of a Bible in the days before printing. Another type of communication we were talking about was bugle calls. How we use sound to transmit messages, and a bugle is like a trumpet, similar, but the one used in the military. They're called bugles. And apparently the bugler would have up to 30 different calls. We speculated that there might be about 6, but apparently there are 30, marking different times of day and particular military manoeuvres like charge and retreat and things like that, actually used on the battlefield. Now they're used in a more ceremonious way. And apparently each country had a different system. So the little tunes that they played for charge is not the same for everybody. Another interesting one that we were discussing was semaphore, the use of flags. So as well as sound to transmit messages over distance, there are also visual messages like fire, etc. And we were talking about using flags, and there was a system called semaphore that was used for transmitting messages between ships, usually. Now, if you know the album Help by the Beatles, you can see that they have their arms in particular positions. And a lot of people presume that as there are 4 members of the Beatles and there are 4 letters in the word help, that they must be spelling out the word help. Well, they don't. If you check the semaphore code, the first one is either an N or an R. It's somewhere between the N and the R. The next one is a U, followed by J and V. So they spell N-U-J-V, NUJV, which doesn't mean anything. Apparently they just put their arms in those positions because it looked good. It's not spelling anything in semaphore. Another question which came up during our conversation on literacy and dyslexia, somebody wanted to know if people in China who use a very different system for writing, do they have dyslexia in China? Well, apparently they do. They do have dyslexia. It's just very different from what we call dyslexia, because ours is more about seeing letters in the right order and getting them mixed up. But there is a thing that they have for people that use that different type of character for not recognizing characters for what they are or getting the characters confused. So yes, in China they do have a type of dyslexia, but it's just not the same as a Western dyslexia. Another thing that we were talking about was stenographers, those people that use a little typewriter in a court. And they use a type of shorthand on a machine. That is a stenotype machine, apparently, and with that machine you can type between 200 and 250 words per minute. It has 22 keys. Apparently down the left side you have all the initial consonants, so the consonants that appear at the beginning of words. On the right side you have another load of consonants that represent the endings of the words. Down the middle you have the thumb keys, which represent the vowels. It says here A, O, E and U, which seems a bit limited. But you can apparently, with this system, you can type all the different words, and it's much faster because it's a sort of phonetic system. You don't have to type all the individual letters, you can just type out the sounds. And it's very quick, apparently. We were also discussing libraries and where the first libraries originated. So you'll be pleased to know, as soon as writing was invented in Mesopotamia, the ancient Sumerians with their clay tablets and their cuneiform writing that we were discussing, they had libraries, more of a place for storing records for things. They weren't libraries that were open to the public. Then by the 3rd century BCE, the famous library in Alexandria in Egypt, that welcomed scholars. So you had to be a scholar to go there, to study their books in their huge library, which unfortunately burnt down. So it was kind of open to the public, but not everybody in the public. You had to be an intellectual type. Then by about 1600 you had libraries that were open to the public. The Bodleian Library in Oxford, later Chetham's Library in Manchester, were open to the public, but you could not borrow the books because the books were still very expensive back then and they were chained to the desk. So they were open to the public, but you couldn't borrow them. The first lending libraries, where you could actually take the book home, they didn't start until 1731 in Philadelphia. There was the Library Company of Philadelphia, which was started by Benjamin Franklin, but you had to be a member, so you paid a fee and then you could borrow books, and that was one of the first real lending libraries. And then 1833 you had the library in the town of Peterborough in New Hampshire, which was a lending library where everybody could go and borrow a book for free because it was supported by taxes. So that was officially the first free lending library as we would know them today, 1833, New Hampshire. We were also discussing the history of the postal service. And yes, postal services go back to very early times. Ancient Egypt, Persia, China, they all had systems for carrying messages, usually for the government, for the kings or pharaohs. And in ancient Rome, they had a system for carrying government messages using relay riders. So riders that rode a stretch and then passed the message to the next rider who charged off. So you had relay riders and rest stations. This was not for public use. This was just for government messages. Then in the Middle Ages, a lot of kings and high up people had systems organized, but really you had to be very rich to have access to this type of thing. It was for private messages for rich merchants and kings. By the 1500s, some European countries started organizing a state system using horses and stage coaches. Again, so they would have a coach carrying messages and they would stop at certain positions along the route and pass the messages to the next people to carry the message on. And people paid based on the distance that the message was going and the number of sheets of paper involved. And then it wasn't until 1840 that in the UK they introduced the postage stamp. The first stamp was called the penny black. It cost a penny, obviously. And it was a fixed rate standard price for any letter, and it was unusual because the sender, the person sending the message, paid. They paid for the stamp, they put it on, and then the system was organised throughout the country. And then the system became more reliable, regular delivery times, post boxes in the street, and postmen with nice red uniforms. So that was their first official and modern system with stamps involved. So there you go, that's the history of the postal service. So many interesting facts this week. Quite interesting, not amazing, but I think you'll agree. There's a lot of interesting stuff there. When you go to take money from a cash point, you put in your card and then you have to insert your PIN number. Your PIN number, spelt P-I-N, that is your personal identification number. Your PIN number. Why do we say that? Okay, let's play a little game then. Here we have a list of some inventions that are related to the idea of communication. All you have to do is put them in the correct order in which they first appeared. The first email, television, telephone, the internet, text messaging, radio, fax machines, and satellite communication. You may want to press the pause button and I'll be back with the answers in a moment. So here are the results. The first of these inventions, which might be a surprising one, is the fax machine. The earliest concept of the fax machine was 1843. I know it didn't come into popular use until the 1980s, but I have it on good authority that my grandfather used one in 1952. So they go all the way back to 1843, surprisingly. The next one on the list is the telephone. Officially 1876. That is the invention by Alexander Graham Bell. Although there were a lot of people working on similar machines, they actually go back to the 1840s as well. So if you had telephoners first, I'll allow that. 1876 then is the Alexander Graham Bell version of the telephone that became the popular one. The radio comes next. Between 1895 and 1901, there were various experiments. Again, various people were working on the radio. Marconi gets the credit. He was the one that sent the first transmission across the Atlantic, and I believe he got the patent on the radio, and the Marconi Radio Company controlled the production of radios for many years. So again, he gets a lot of credit, which isn't necessarily due. Next is the television. From 1927 was the first TV. That was John Logie Baird. Satellite communication began in 1962. The next one is the internet. Actually began in 1969. Even though it didn't go public until 1991, the original internet is much older. As with many inventions, they tend to exist for a long time before the public get their hands on them. The first email sent in 1971. And then text messaging first appeared in 1992. And the first text message was Merry Christmas. And there we have some interesting facts about the technology of communication.
Human beings have always found ways to communicate. Long before we had writing systems or digital devices, we used gestures, sounds, and facial expressions to share meaning. When our ancestors gathered around fires, they told stories, passed down knowledge, and tried to make sense of the world together. These early conversations were face-to-face, immediate, and deeply human. As time went on, our tools evolved. We carved symbols into stone, painted on cave walls, and eventually developed written languages. Writing allowed us to send messages across distance and preserve ideas across generations, marking the beginning of recorded history. Indeed, it seems impossible to imagine human progress without the development of writing. Later came the printing press, the telegraph, the telephone, each one expanding our reach and speeding up the exchange of information. The printing press in particular marked a turning point. It allowed knowledge to be copied, shared, and spread beyond the elite few. Ideas were no longer locked away in monasteries or palaces. They became accessible to more people, leading to the democratization of knowledge. Today, we live in a world where we can reach anyone, anywhere, almost instantly. We send voice notes instead of speaking, we post stories instead of telling them in person, and we often communicate through screens more than we do face-to-face. In many ways, it's extraordinary. But at the same time, it's easy to forget how much we still need the traditional forms of communication. Because fundamentally, we haven't changed all that much. We're still the same creatures who once sat around fires at night, sharing stories. We still crave connection, understanding, and the sense that someone is really listening. Face-to-face communication brings something that no message or screen can quite replace: body language, eye contact, silence, laughter. These small, often unspoken things help us feel safe, heard, and human. Despite all our advances, some of the most powerful moments still happen when two or more people are simply present with each other, talking, listening, and sharing space. Whether it's a quiet conversation over coffee or a lively family dinner, these moments build relationships and give life meaning. So, yes, technology has transformed the way we communicate. But the heart of communication, the desire to connect, to be seen and understood, remains exactly the same. And perhaps that's something we shouldn't forget.
Here's something quite amusing that somebody sent to me. This is a picture of Jim Morrison's van. And this is a picture of Van Morrison's gym. Quite amusing, I think you'll agree. And on that humorous note, we will have to leave it. That's about all we've got time for today. I'd just like to say thank you for everybody that came to the meeting to discuss the importance of being earnest. Very successful as usual, and very nice to see everybody again. The next one is the end of term meeting for Friday the 27th, but this might have to be brought forward to the 20th because I've already heard that some people are going away on holiday. So at the moment it's penciled in for the 27th, but we might change it to the 20th. So if I don't see you through the week, I'll see you next time on Round the Table. So have a good week. Till next week.